Hi, I'm Joe.
And I'm Dave.
And we're the hosts of the Chasing Tomorrow podcast, where we bring you stories that delve into the science and spirit behind intriguing people doing extraordinary things.
Welcome to the Chasing Tomorrow podcast. This week it's episode 32. This week is going to be fun. This interview is with who I believe is the most intellectual, smartest ultra runner that I've ever run with. And a guy that has really outsmarted every other runner and all the younger runners as well too, to being one of America's best ultra marathoners, Bob Hearn. Now, Bob Hearn is 55 years old and lives in Portola Valley. He's run Badwater 135, the Spartathlon many times, I think three or four times. Three times, perfect. And he specializes in 24-hour, 48-hour, and is dabbling now in further distances, 6 days. I'll want to talk to him more about that. His personal best in 24 hours is 154 miles, and that placed him on the American 24-hour World Championships team, which is incredible.
Well, actually, I have not yet ever made the team. I was an alternate, actually, the last last two times. But yeah.
But what's really interesting about Bob is that he got his Ph.D. from MIT and working with artificial intelligence with an emphasis on behavior-based robotics. And where I'm going to ask him more about that, because I think a lot of that transition between his cerebral abilities and then the rest of us really puts him in a place all unto his own. Now, Bob also has a fascination with puzzles and game theory. And if anybody is out there and wants to read in a spectacular in-depth blog that I just also found is maybe a little bit behind date, it's bobhearn.blogspot.com. So welcome to the Chasing Tomorrow podcast, Bob.
Thank you. It's
well,
great to be here.
Yeah, awesome, Bob. You know, as I understand it, you didn't sort of dabble in ultra running until later in life. But we do like to sort of get an early view of our guests. Talk a little bit about, were you a runner in high school? Were you fast, competitive, none of the above? So tell us the journey before sort of the awakening. We'd love to hear that.
Yeah, I was not athletic at all. I didn't run in high school. The closest thing would be marching band. And I tried to start running in college when I met right before my freshman year. I met my future wife, and she was a runner. And I sort of tried to start running to impress her, but it didn't stick. And over the years, I would occasionally try to start running for health and fitness, but it was just too boring to do that. So it wasn't till much later, until 2004, when I was 38, and we moved to Vancouver. And I got talked somehow into joining this team entry for the Vancouver Sun Run, a big 10K. I never run that far. And I realized that, I wanted to pull my weight. So I was looking at training plans, and I realized, actually, if I have a training plan to follow and a goal to work towards, all of a sudden running is fun. And I lived right next to Pacific Spirit Park, so beautiful trails to run there. And so I got sucked in, and the 10K went well. And then I thought, I've already run like 12 miles in training. Maybe I can do a half marathon. And that went well. And then I got my sights set on Boston. And so I found, Bob Fitzinger's advanced marathoning. And once I got kind of hooked, I was hooked. And I got into Marathon Maniacs, ran lots and lots of marathons for several years, and did my first ultra in 2008. And since then, gradually have shifted more to ultras. I really don't run marathons anymore. I'm not fast enough to be competitive there. But I realized, the longer I go, the more competitive I am.
Mm-hmm. And so what I heard there, Bob, was that you're really interested in the process. Is that one of the things that really interests you about running, and especially now about ultra marathons?
It is. Thinking about the process, I can leverage some of my sort of analytical skills. But the other thing that appeals to me is that running is really a very different thing than anything I've ever done before. it's a way to use my body and my brain in a fundamentally different way and sort of connect directly and engage with the world and use my mind in a not strictly logical way. You know, if you're running a race, you have to sort of use mental tricks and mental judo and keep your head in the right place. It's not really the same thing as the kind of problem solving that computer programming is. So it's a mix there of using my skills and finding new areas that are interesting.
Yeah, I always like to just go back and touch a little bit on that marathon to ultra marathon transition. You know, I think there's a bunch of us. I became very curious as well. You know, I had done probably not as many as you. I did maybe 35 road marathons, and I figured it out. You know, I knew like, what that was, and then I was curious because those ultra runners just sort of looked fun. Like they looked different. They didn't have, you know, the tight pants and the nice tank tops. They just were like out and they're very supportive. It was like every time you met one, they were like, oh yeah, come out and be with us. Was it the community that appealed to you or just pushing yourself harder to go longer?
Well, I wasn't even aware of the community at first. I was into marathons were where it was at. And I was, you know, in Marathon Maniacs, I was trying to get more Maniac stars. So I was doing lots of Maniac marathons close together. And the first time I did 2 in one weekend, a friend of mine said, well, if you can do that, you can do a 50 miler. It's not any harder. In fact, it's probably easier. So come do this White River 50 with me. And I looked at, you know, its elevation profile. It's got like 8,000 feet of gain. I'm like, what? That's not, how can anybody do that? But I got suckered in and I did it. It just about killed me. And so I didn't even know there really was such a thing, you know. I didn't know anything about the ultra running community, but gradually I got more exposed to it. And yeah, definitely the community appealed to me. It's a very different sort of feel, very supportive and yeah.
The one more point I'd make on that, sorry, Bob, Dave.
Go ahead, Joe.
I can really remember the first time I heard someone tell me they ran 100 miles and I was like, that's not really possible. Like this intellectual gap is so big. Then you go and do 100. And when you tell people you don't understand their reaction, even though you went through it, it's like, well, but yeah, I did it. Like, do you ever feel that like it's such a weird thing to have seen it on one side? You think you'd connect better with how crazy that sounds to people.
Yeah, that's all relative. I mean, I remember when I was at MIT, we lived in Newton, like a block from the Boston Marathon course, and we would go and watch the Boston Marathon every year. And it was incomprehensible to me that anybody could run 26 miles, you know, and then little did I realize I've now run Boston like 13 times, I think. And now marathons are way too short to be fun and interesting. They're just like, oh, you have to run so hard and so fast doing a marathon. Why would anybody want to do that? And it's all just relative to what you're used to.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And would you also say that, Bob, maybe it's since, you know, now it's that you live in the environment and you've done the analysis on it, because, you know, really ultimately, I mean, the human body is meant to do this. We can do this.
Absolutely.
And now you've believed your own story, you've drank your own Kool-Aid, but you're the master of analysis. And so when you do the analysis, you're like, you know, just like before in the you know, before we pressed record, you were saying it's not rocket science. And I said, well, to Joe and I, it is, but really I guess it's not.
You know, you say I do the research and I do the science. I don't know. I mean, how for many years my philosophy was even pace everything, and that's not rocket science, and it's not. Who knows whether that's the best strategy? I sort of changed my attitude in the last couple of years, and I'm trying other things. But yeah, you know, before I run a 24-hour, I'll make a spreadsheet and I'll put some numbers in and some paces, and I'll play with different things, but it boils down to thinking that I want to run close to even. And all that means is that I'm doing a little bit more homework than most other people are who think that if they want to go out and run by feel. You know, don't you realize an hour in that you're like on world record pace? And whereas, you know, I'm sitting there thinking, I know that I have to run, you know, 215 laps or whatever to get the goal that I want to reach. And I don't see any point starting faster than that. I've changed my attitude on that a little bit, but you know, it's not rocket science to run even splits. You just have to do a little bit of math and figure out what your splits are supposed to be, and then have the discipline to stick to them. And most people don't do one or the other of those things.
But for our listeners, let's talk a little bit about what that means, because they may be listening and not know what an even split is.
Well, sorry.
No, not at all.
How do I?
No problem. Yeah, Bob's a wanted man. Everybody's calling him.
Sorry. Yeah, that just, maybe we'll need to edit this.
Yes. We can
We can ask that question again. How about that, Joe?
Yeah.
Yeah, you bet.
Yeah, why don't we go ahead there? And,
Yeah. So Bob, for our listeners who might not be completely up to speed on this idea of even splits, can you describe that a little bit to the listener?
Well, I mean, the basic idea behind even splits, if you're thinking about a marathon, that means run the first half in the same time that you run the second half. You don't slow down. Most people slow down, meaning that they start faster than they finish. Sometimes you can run negative splits. I used to like to run my marathons with a slight negative split. I always thought when I was doing that, thinking about longer races, that, you get to the ultra marathon world, there's no way you can run even splits. You just can't do that. And that's the way that most people think now. And maybe they're right. I mean, you can run even splits for longer races. There's a question of, is that the best strategy? Anybody can run an even split if they start slow enough. You hear people say it's not possible to run a 24-hour race with even splits. You're going to be totally beat up at the end. And it's like, well, no, I mean, you could walk the whole thing and then you're going to get an even split. But the question is, how fast can you go and hold an even split? And what does that performance look like compared to a more traditional performance where you start running what feels like a very easy pace, but if you do the math, you realize, oh my God, for a 24-hour, I'm like on world record pace. Is that smart? Well, maybe it's smart if you're somebody who's going to set a world record. But for most of us, I don't think it is.
No, and is there right now amongst the ultra running community or even yourself, are you building a program where there's a perfect formula? I mean, I look at take Janis Kuros with his 24-hour pacing and 6-day pacing. I mean, the guy goes out like a lightning beam, and now he can hold on to a reasonable pace at the end, which I mean, reasonable for when I say that it's still lightning fast for you and I. But then you take a look at Zach Bitter and his 100-mile world record, and he ran a negative split on that. I believe he did. And so, is there a perfect is there a perfect formula?
I don't think so. I mean, that's been an obsession of mine for years, to try to understand that. And I've read, innumerable physiology texts and muscle function and you name it. And I've made numerical computer models simulating what happens to muscles over time during a race to try to find an optimum. And it's funny, up until maybe a year and a half ago when you and I, Dave, did the 6 days in the Dome.
Right.
I think maybe up until then, I sort of had in my head just this sort of very simple logical argument that even pacing is always going to be close to optimal because, like earlier that year, I had run the D3 24-hour, trying to secure my spot on the 24-hour team, and for which I needed 155 miles. I'd run 154, but there were two guys just ahead of me, and I had to run 155. And I was doing it bang on even, and I do a run walk strategy in 24 hours. So I would like run for 6 laps and then walk for a minute. And that's a little trick that helps you keep you slow enough early on without having to run at a pace that is just not efficient. But anyway, I was solid through like 22 hours, bang on. And then I just fell apart. I couldn't hold it anymore, and it was a dramatic collapse. And I ran 150, which is a good number for a 24-hour, especially if you're 53, 54.
Yeah.
But it wasn't enough to make the team. And after that, I generally do analysis, and I post my pace charts on Facebook and stuff. And you can see this chart. It's like there's a straight line for 22 hours, and then it goes down. And people ask me, well, don't you think you should have started a little bit faster? And I look at that chart and I say, are you kidding me? Look what happened. I couldn't even hold that pace for 22 hours. If I started faster, of course I'm going to blow up sooner. And to me, that logic had sort of seemed irrefutable. But I realized that, it's very different to say, maybe you have to actually do the math and do the analysis and say, what if I start a little bit faster, but I gradually slow down throughout the race? Intuitively, I would have thought, under any reasonable model of accumulation of muscle damage or fatigue or whatever you want to call it, that's going to be inferior to holding a steady pace, just because it seems more efficient to always run at the same effort and not, if you go a little faster than what you can sustain, you're accumulating damage at a greater rate. That just seemed obvious to me. Finally, I sat down to actually do some modeling, and I figured any reasonable model I come up with, this is what it's going to say. And it was more the opposite. Any reasonable model I came up with said, no, you want to start faster and slow down. That's going to be worth a lot more. I made the simplest model that I came up with, which is simply that muscle damage accumulates proportional to the effort that you are using your muscles at. Basically suggested that if I can run 154 miles at even pacing in a 24-hour, if I start significantly faster, I should be able to run 162. And I'm like, what the hell? That's crazy. And so it opened my eyes, and I really honestly just about given up on 24-hour, because I tried for years to make a 24-hour team and always come up just short. And I thought, I'm not getting any younger. I'm running races. I'm executing perfectly, and my body just isn't going to go any farther. But that reawakened my interest in pacing strategies and 24-hour. And the frustrating thing is, talking about the modeling, there's just not enough data. You don't know enough about how muscle fatigue works. And I can change one parameter in a model and get entirely different answers as to what the optimal pacing strategy should be. So that's a little disconcerting. But it means that there's more. I did an interview on Ultrarunner podcast a couple of years ago that he called Bob Hearn and the Science of Pacing or something like that. And now, I would say there's definitely more an art of pacing. You have to use logic and reason, but you have to balance that with your own experience and intuition that comes much more slowly as you learn over years.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then Bob as well too, like pacing strategies and even splits and negative splits and positive splits. I think that just based upon experience, they change over marathoning, into 100-mile racing to 24-hour racing, which is for top runners 150 to 165 miles or 170 miles. But I think that overall, it kind of gets all thrown out the window when you start going into 6 days. Can you tell us a little bit more about that when it comes to your experiences with 6-day racing so far?
Well, I've done 2 6-day races. I did the EMU in Hungary in 2018, and then the 6 days in the Dome last year. And the only reason I did that was I'd run a 48-hour with Joe Fegis, who has the 6-day American record, 606 miles, which is also the best 6-day anybody in the world has run since, I think, 2007, if I remember.
Incredible,
correctly.
Absolutely.
And after I did this 48 and I set an American age group record there, Joe came up to me and said, Bob, you really need to do 6-day, because you can take down my record and you might even be able to challenge Giannis Kouros. What the hell are you talking about? I'm not Giannis Kouros. But it was enough for me to start playing with numbers in a spreadsheet. And on paper, 630 miles in 6 days doesn't seem at all unreasonable. It's like, if I can run 150 in 24 hours, what's the big deal about running 100 miles a day for 6 days?
Exactly.
Right? And, so I spent a lot of time with a spreadsheet playing with the numbers. And the fun thing about when you move up to multi-day, of course, is you have to factor in sleep strategy. And that's a whole new variable to play with. Do you sleep in one block per day or multiple blocks? And do you sleep a lot and run fast, or do you sleep very little and run slower? And so it became it became a very fun intellectual puzzle, just mapping out the possibilities. And I got sucked into this trap that, you think you're accomplishing something when you're sitting there with a spreadsheet and you're playing with numbers, and you play with the numbers until everything comes out nicely and looks good. It's like, I just solved this. I figured out how to run a world record. And then you get out and you actually try to do it. Well, that's another matter.
Absolutely.
And
but
when I ran EMU, the one in Hungary, I did go out with a pacing plan for the world record, because I would have zero shot at any other world record in running. Anything shorter would be too fast, unquestionably. 6 day was, very likely out of reach, but on paper, it was a shot. So why not try? And I blew up after 2.5 days. I had a tendon injury and had to pull out. So I thought I'd get a little smarter when I ran 6 days in the dome. I thought, well, I want to leave myself the shot still, now that I have more experience and I know what went wrong and I've worked on some things. I still want to leave my shot at that world record, especially because 6 days in the dome is flat, it's climate controlled, it's the theoretically optimal conditions. But I'm not going to be greedy. I'm going to go out and try to run even splits for the American record, 606, which already is obviously greedy. Really, the goal that I had in mind was the age group American record, the over 50 American record, which was Joe's, I think, 551 miles. I would have been happy with that, but I thought, okay, if I run 101 miles a day and I can hold that, that's 606. But if I feel good and I add 1 mile every day, and then the last day I don't sleep and I power through on caffeine, then that will get me the world record. So that's a very extreme negative split. And that did not work. I ran 101 the first day and 102 the second day. And by the third day, I was having some injury issues and I ran, I was just over 300 after 3 days. And I hung on, I ran 530, which is a very solid 6 day race. Joe stayed 2 miles ahead of me the whole way. Damn it.
That's what Joe does. Yeah.
Yeah. But I came away with that there was sort of an aha moment for me during that race, because by about the fifth day, I wasn't trying to run fast anymore. I had this gastroc injury, and that made me do a lot of walking. But when, I was icing it and when I could work through the pain, I could try to run some more. But then by about the fifth day, when I would try to run even at a super slow pace, it was feeling incredibly tough aerobically. Like I was trying to run at 5K pace just to run, like 11-minute mile. And I was running or walking next to Ray Qualovitz, and I'm saying, Ray, what the hell's going on here? All these other people are still running. I can't even run, 11-minute miles. He said, Bob, you got 400 miles on your legs already. You've got, and these other people don't. And that means you got, like only half your muscle fibers are working. And that means they need twice as much oxygen to do the normal load. I'm like, oh my God. And I suddenly realized what an idiot I had been, because I had this idea that to run these really long races, you don't need a lot of aerobic fitness. I thought as a 3-hour marathoner, I can run 160 miles in a 24-hour. I have this aerobic capacity to do that because I never have to run faster than a 9-minute mile, and even easier for 6 day. If I can average, I don't know what it is, but you're not ever running 9-minute miles in a 6 day. Most of us, if we're not crazy, I was doing, I don't remember what the numbers are, but when I was walking, I was doing sub 14. So I was, anyway, my thought was I want enough aerobic capacity to where it is an extremely comfortable aerobic effort to run the pace that I want to hold from start to finish. And I don't want any more, because why waste training effort accumulating speed that I'm never going to use? And moreover, muscles by weight are about 1/3 mitochondria and capillaries. And if I build that big an engine, that's just so much dead weight and dead training time and dead training stress on my body that's not going to serve me. But once Ray told me that one simple statement, I just realized what an idiot I'd been, because after 4 or 5 days of running, the muscle fibers that are still running need that excess oxygen delivery and ability to use oxygen to do anything. So I do need that extra capacity late in the race. And that again changed everything for me. That's sort of when I sat down to start doing this actual modeling and changing my training and pacing philosophy.
So then for the listeners, so what we're saying is that the fatigue, as we would sort of generally define the word, was building up at such a level that it was more effort to be able to maintain the speed. You couldn't overcome the fatigue because the muscles were not recovering because there was no recovery time. So therefore, the amount of system you had to perform with was reducing at some sort of maybe even accelerating rate over time.
Exactly.
And so that it was impossible, we don't like that word, right? But it was increasingly evident that you wouldn't be able to, without that extra energy, which was why you're breathing so hard, be able to try and move this thing that really didn't have the capability, because it needed to go into a recovery mode to then be able to reset itself.
And my thinking at the time was that there was no chance for that recovery, because I was thinking in terms of cumulative physical muscle damage, microtrauma. And when, I had that conversation with Ray, I explained to my crew what's going on, and they were not at all thrilled to hear me sort of come to this conclusion that it's impossible for me to run for the rest of the race.
Yeah, it's a bad timing to come up with that conclusion, of course. Yeah.
Right. And now I think, probably, fatigue is so complicated. I think now, looking at the numbers and doing more analysis, it's what they call long-lasting fatigue. It's more metabolic fatigue than actual muscle damage is probably what's going on at that point. But it's really complicated. And the metabolic fatigue, sometimes you can recover by walking, sometimes you can recover by a few hours sleep. But there's this so-called long-lasting fatigue that can take days or weeks.
Yeah, no, and I agree, Bob. I think a lot can be learned by looking at history, and Yannis Kouros, the world's greatest multi-day runner ever, he did a lot of speed work. He developed an incredible aerobic capacity, and you see a lot of like the world's best 100-mile runners now, and they're doing track work. They're doing 400-meter repeats. And 5 years ago, I was scratching my head saying, why would you ever do that? And now I've come to realize that, like for me, this upcoming summer, I would love to run across the country and across Canada in record time. And that's over 100 kilometers a day, every day. And but the pace is so slow. But yet right now I'm doing a tremendous amount of speed work to be able to drive that aerobic capacity, because that's, I have a feeling I'm going to really be relying upon that on the back half of the country. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think so. It might be different, because the question is, what is your steady state, right? Maybe if your steady state I was not running steady state. I was accumulating fatigue and accumulating damage. And I think when you run across the country, by the time you finish, you're going to be at a steady state where you're recovering. You're not accumulating fatigue, right? You're recovering at whatever fatigue you incur over any given day. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
No, I think it's true. I think that it is a recovery game. And, if you're running for 12 hours or you're running for 14 hours, can you recover within that 10 to 12 hour period of time in between? And recovery becomes, everything. And I would love to take this conversation offline with you, of course. I think listening to you, Bob, it makes us all realize that we know nothing. And,
I know nothing either. It's just, I know, I thought harder about it, and I realized more deeply that I know nothing.
Isn't that the truth?
We have a different intuitive sense now, though, of where the risk factors are. The issue is we can't control for them. That's the part that's hard, right? You cannot see how the system's operating and have that data in real time that would say to you, oh, by the way, the muscle's fatiguing faster than you wanted because you didn't eat the right foods and the weather was different and or whatever the reason, right? We don't have the visibility. And so sometimes we're surprised by our performance because we don't realize that, well, maybe our training was better or wasn't, but we can be surprised upwards go faster and downward go slower. But there are some physical limitations. The Iron Cowboy, the guy who did the 50 Ironman in 50 days, he said that there were probably at most 10 more days he could have gone before he would have actually been laid out. Like he wouldn't have been able to move again. So he could see that he was actually literally falling apart as it went along, like up to 30 and then even up to 40, it was okay. It was in those last 10 where the body itself is, it's almost like, when they do a structural test on metal and you start to see where the break point is, and you can keep bending and bending and bending, but there is that point where those molecules don't hold together anymore. We don't see that. And I think that's part of what Dave's, at least in my opinion, what Dave is practicing to do is to have enough spare capacity so that, to your point, Bob, he is actually not declining day after day. He's never gone into the depth that happens in the 6th day. And so, but if he was doing 100 miles a day, he would then be going into that spare capacity. He wouldn't have enough buffer. And
Yeah.
that's the piece that we'll all sort of
That
try
makes
and
sense.
figure out.
Yeah.
So now that you've sort of got this insight, does it make you more curious about doing these races and trying different strategies?
Absolutely. Since I guess since the beginning of last year, I no longer try to run even, and I'm playing with various declining pacing strategies. And I had a good year of running. I had a lot of success last year. I haven't found the optimal. Certainly for 24-hour, I had a disappointing Desert Solstice when I thought I had to go out on pace for 160 miles to make the team, and I blew up and ran 137, 138 or something. But I followed a very strict pacing program where I started running like 205 laps, and then I was going to finish at like, I don't remember, 215 laps or something. But and it was psychologically so rewarding to be able to realize that, every so often I get to slow down a little. And instead of having it's so deeply wired into my brain when I'm thinking about, you're 10 hours into a 24-hour, and that's sort of about where it starts to get hard for me, because it's getting dark and my body says, I want to go to bed. And you realize that the bulk of the race is still ahead of you and you're already tired, and you're thinking, there's no way I can keep doing what I've been doing all day for another 14 hours. But now the psychology, I suddenly realized I don't have to do that. I get to slow down. And that was a welcome change for me. I'm still playing with the parameters on how much faster I can start, and what's the rate that I slow down at. And I exceeded my capacity at Desert Solstice, but I did what I thought I had to do, so I can't complain there. But earlier in the year, my first race last year was a pretty flat 100-miler where I was going after an age group American record, which I hit, and I had a declining pace strategy. And again, when I did a 48-hour, I already had the age group record there, but I beat that again by not trying to run even splits. Ball State 500K was a special case. That's not a fixed time short loop thing where you can even think about pacing the same way.
No.
That was a very interesting experience.
I'm assuming that that experience, you have to get to that certain town or the gas station where you can end up buying the food and on and so forth at a specific time. Is that right?
Well, it depends. You can run it crude or screwed is the terminology.
Yeah.
And I wasn't even going to run Ball State. I was going to run actually I was going to run EMU 6-day, and that got canceled. And then I was going to run 6 days in the Dome, and that got canceled 1 week before Ball State. And so Ray Kay suggested, hey, Bob, you might still want to think about Vol State. So 1 week in advance? And, Vol State always sells out instantly. So I didn't even think, but, so many people had canceled because of COVID that turned out I actually could get in. I didn't think there was any way I could assemble a crew. So I was going to have to do it screwed. And that was very intimidating. So I was doing all my homework, as you said, about figuring out, okay, I have to be at this town by this time because these stores are going to be open here, and I have to think about what I'm going to carry everything on my back, which I don't normally do. Plus, I've been training for running, on the flat track in 55 degrees and not on hills in 95 degrees and humid. But then somebody stepped up and wanted to crew me. Regina Sui and Bill Page said, hey, I've done this race and we want to come crew you. It's like, okay. So
Perfect.
if you have crew, then you don't have to worry about any of that. And, they drive along, not literally alongside you, but they meet you every so often with their car and give you ice and whatever. So I didn't have to worry about any of that. It was just pacing. And, you think about when am I going to sleep in the heat of the day, and things like that. You still have to deal with the planning of.
That's pretty good to have quite a few events in 2020. What was your 24-hour record? What did you set it at?
My best 24-hour was 154. That was at Desert Solstice 2 years ago.
You said you set the American record last year. Was it last year? For the age group?
Last year I set actually 5 age group records. I set the 100-mile at, I ran a 14:44, which was just a 3-minute record at the Scurf 100-mile in South Carolina. I ran the 48-hour at 3 days at the fair, And then actually at Desert Solstice, I just turned 55. So I set 3 new ones, even though none of them were very strong. A 15:28 100-mile split was an age group track American record. No, actually overall American 100-mile record for 55. And then also the 200K, the 24-hour. But both of those numbers were soft for the track. So I was well short of my actual goals. But any race, when you come away with 3 age group American records, you can't really say it was a total failure. So
absolutely.
Oh, I think that's,
so Bob, like what intrigues you so much about records? Like I'm intrigued by records, Canadian records or world records or whatever. But like I'm super curious to ask everyone, well, why records?
Well, it's a mix. I can't deny that there's some ego there. You want to be a big fish. I mean, admittedly, it is a small pond, but you want to do your best, and it's a line in the sand that is a benchmark that you didn't set, that's out there, that is what the world or the country or whatever has put in front of you, something to compare yourself against. And in practical terms, it's something to focus my training towards. It gives me a goal, something concrete, numbers I can put in my spreadsheet. If I just go out and think I want to do my best, that's a lot harder for me.
No, I agree. It's a recognizable number that matters for one reason or another. Sometimes out there you find something else that matters. It's a split or something rather. And, it matters so much to you at that moment, but yet it doesn't really like who cares. But it's a number that matters. Yeah, I agree.
I think this complexity of the systems, whether it's the physical or the mental system, but for sure, neurotransmitters play a role, and dopamine is a heck of an asset when leveraged properly, and when you know that that's what's possible, that kicks in a better way than would otherwise. Otherwise, it's not necessary.
Absolutely.
You don't need a reward system to just go do a fun run for 50 miles. You just go out and do. You can do it without your watch. Like if you knew where it was, but the rest of the time, and I think it's actually good for us. I think it's part of the human system that's different than the rest of the species on the planet, which is this constant improvement. And, we might as well use this resource to the best of its ability. I don't think any of us will ever get to whatever 100% is, right? Yeah. Complete optimization. Even when you crossed the finish line and thought that you got there, you still had something left. And it's a fun pursuit. I think that's part of, what Dave and I love about the podcast is the people we get to meet who are all in their own way, sort of playing around with the same concepts. And it's fun to try and understand why someone, and, there's always different reasons, but all that matters is we're all having a good time, living a life, doing some good stuff. Like going out and running an ultra race is, we had more people doing that. We'd probably have a lot less stress and issues, right? We loved when we talked to Courtney, and she said, my favorite part is that, like you fall down an ultra race, everyone comes to help you. If you're on the track running a race, they just like run right over you. See you later.
Yeah. So Bob,
Courtney's just amazing. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Courtney's lovely. So I got to ask you, Bob, because I've also been told, and we were talking earlier about running communities and things. I've also been told that you've run a race or two naked. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, where do I start? I guess it actually starts with this race, Beta Breakers in San Francisco. It's a 12K that's been going on for over 100 years. And we moved back to California, I think in 2012. And I knew that there's this group of people who like to run Beta Breakers naked. And it looked fun. It was kind of scary. And I thought, I don't want to do that, but maybe I'll run it in a G-string and just sort of have fun. And so I made this decision sort of at the last minute. I had signed up for the race. I had a seated start at the very front of, 30,000, 50,000 people, however many. And it didn't occur to me that the people in the seated start are actually, those are serious runners. I showed up and Med Kufleski was there, and I shook his hand. I wished him luck at the Olympics. He was running that year. But I was the only guy in the seated corral, who was anything other than, normal running attire. And I'm standing there in my G-string getting ready to go. But it was so fun and so liberating to just run through the streets mostly naked. And so I did that for a few years. And I started going to Burning Man, and at Burning Man they have a 50K. And the 50K has an award for the first naked finisher. You have to do the whole thing naked, no G-string, no, you can wear shoes, that's it. But a lot of people did it, and I mean, there's a lot of nudity at Burning Man in the first place. There's no shame or judgment, or it's just,
it's Burning Man. Yeah,
it's Burning Man. And running 50 miles in the 50K in the desert at Burning Man naked, it's just, everybody should do that. It's just a blast. So yeah, I've done that 3 times, I guess. Yeah. And that's a blast.
All right. Well, that's the first on our show, Dave.
There we go.
Okay.
We're good to try out new ideas here. So the cool part here is that, you're in this, class of, we know that ultra runners, maybe not 21-year-olds are the best at it. As we get older, we're sort of good at it. But then there's that point where, some of our performance can decline as we get older, but you seem to be holding it together. What's your training like? What do you, do you have a pretty good training regimen? What do you got in miles in a week?
It's the last several years, I've essentially not done any speed work. It's mostly roads, pretty flat, a lot of track. I try to hit the track twice a week. Depends on what I'm training for. If I'm training for a track 24-hour or any fixed time race, really, I'm going to be doing a lot of track runs, working on my race pacing. Typically, for the bulk of the training block, I'll be 70, 80 miles, and I like to peak around 110, 120. But it's all easy running. The last year, or year and a half, I've tried to incorporate a little bit more speed work. And I don't mean, tempo really is as fast as I mean. Just get something, my legs comfortable to something a little faster than I want to sustain, rather than my old idea of just always being bang on what I want to sustain. But I'm limited by ever since 7 years ago, I guess, I tore my left hamstring tendons, and I've always had tendon issues. I've had some Achilles surgery. I'm basically always limited by some tendon or other that keeps me from doing a lot of even tempo work. That will impact my volume if I try to do that. So really, it's just a lot of slow miles. Every weekend I'll go to the track and do 20, 22, and midweek I'll go to the track and do 15. And a lot of that will be working on my pacing for whatever I'm training for. Yeah. And the rest of the week will typically be doubles most days, just on roads and easy trails.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty cool. And then when you're doing the track work, what's that kind of pacing that you're doing when you do, say, 15 miles on the track? Are you doing the 2:05 pacing round? Or?
Yeah. Sometimes I'll do, like this block before Desert Solstice, I tried to do, sometimes I did some 155, some 150s for 6 or 8 miles, but I don't think I did anything faster than that. Really, a lot of it, I would, when I would go out, one thing I like to do close to like a 2 weeks, week and a half before like a track 24 hours, I'll go for my last big day. I'll go and I'll do a 20 miler in the morning on the track, and then I'll go do another 20 miler in the evening. It's more of a mental thing and a confidence thing, just to say, I know that even after I've done this, I can always go out and I can bang out an easy 20 miles. If I can do that and I feel good after the second 20 miler, that gives me confidence going in. But yeah, so like this time I would actually, my 20 milers, I would start at 2:05 pace. And the other thing I've been doing the last couple of years is writing custom apps for my Garmin, which you can do. So I will put in my pacing plan into my Garmin, so that every time I manually lap, it will say, okay, this next 6-lap track block is supposed to be a 13:32 or whatever. And then, whenever I manually lap, it's, oh, you're 5 seconds ahead, you're 1 minute behind, whatever. I'm always bang on what my plan is, because, I didn't do that for a while. And so when I was making my planning spreadsheets, I would have to tweak the numbers to get it to where, well, this 6-lap block, do I want to do it in 14 minutes or in 13:50? 13:50, it's going to be harder to add up those 10 seconds in my head. And because if you keep, like you say, I'm going to do 6 laps in 14 minutes, and you manually lap your Garmin every 6 laps, then it's easy to see how far ahead or behind you are. right? Because you can multiply by 14, just add 14 minutes, and it's always going to be a whole minute boundary. So I had, lots of mental tricks I would use like that to keep me on my pacing before I suddenly realized, oh, I should just write an app for my Garmin and it'll do all that for me. And lately I've added some bells and whistles where I can, change my pacing plan halfway through and say, well, 159 is not going to happen. What happens if I try to go 154, and then it'll say, okay, now you want to be doing this according to whatever I've programmed in to start with.
And I love that, Bob. I think it eliminates a lot of the emotion. At least that's what I have a lot of the time. Emotion and ego drive a lot of runs. And if you could end up eliminating that by a pre-planned analysis, then why not? But let's go back to analysis for a second, because I can't end this conversation without talking to you about what I think is the coolest thing to come to ultra marathons in years, and you know exactly where I'm going to go with this, and something that I think that you should be able to be the world's best at, because really it's simple analysis. It really just is until it's easy until it's not. It's what Lazarus Lake always says. What about backyard? So tell me what your thoughts are on backyard, and in 2021 at Biggs, are we going to see somebody go 100 hours?
I doubt it. Not at Biggs, just because the course, you've been there and I haven't, but I don't think that course is fast enough from what I hear.
It's a tough course. Yeah, it's a tough course.
Yeah. It's funny, Laz has wanted me to run Biggs for years, and I was registered 2019. I did not run it because I was not recovered from the dome. And I think were the only person who was at both the dome and Biggs who didn't blow up very early at Biggs.
Well, I blew up really early at the dome. I don't know if you remember that. Right. I think I only ran 2 days and then I slept for 4. So while I was sleeping,
everybody who ran all 6 days, they were toast by Biggs. See, the thing for me is Spartathlon is my favorite race, and that always conflicts with Biggs. And I was not running Spartathlon that year because actually I thought I was going to be running 24-hour worlds, and I wasn't. But it was going to be too close to the dome anyway. And but Laz, like I said, Laz has wanted me to run it for a while, and he thinks I would do well at it. But my initial take is, well, but you're already forcing everyone to only run 4 and 6 miles every hour. It's a stupid trick that I have, but there goes my advantage, right? But I guess, it's really a lot more complicated than that, because it comes down to, do you run 55-minute laps, and recover as little as possible, or do you run 40-minute laps and try to sleep 15 minutes? And my thought, watching Biggs for several years, was, why are these people, imagine you're running a 20, so when you watch Biggs, most of the people are out by 24 hours, right? Imagine you running a 24-hour race. Would you ever consider running for 40 minutes and then sitting in your chair for 15? You just wouldn't do it. It's insane. And yet most people who try to do that, they're out by 24 hours. And so I thought, well, obviously I'm going to start when I do a backyard by running 55, 57-minute laps. And maybe when it's night and I'm on the road, then I'll, like, at the beginning of the night, I'll try to throw in a fast one and get a 15-minute nap, and then again at the end. That seemed to make sense to me. But like I said, I didn't run Biggs, but I did run one virtual race last year, the Quarantine Backyard. Thank you for setting that up. And I didn't have a good race. I had, it's funny because, April in Bay Area, California, I should have had a weather advantage over everybody, but we had a freak rainstorm. It was apocalyptic. And, I was feeling sorry for myself because I had this total disastrous weather, and I could see everyone else on Zoom. And some other people had, Anna Carlson probably had it worse, but I had really horrible weather. And I was stupid, and I just ran through, continuously ran through the puddles, and realized after 34 hours that I was getting trench foot, and it was too late by then to do the foot care I needed. So I had to stop, but I'd already learned a lot about the format, and I'd been through a lot of torture. And I sort of come through the other side to a good mental place. I went into it thinking I'd like to think I could do 48 hours. I didn't think I could do much more than that, because honestly, sleep deprivation is a really weak link for me. And not being able to ever sleep for more than 10 minutes, that's probably not going to work for me. But I thought I could get through 48 hours, and I think I could have if I didn't have the weather. I have to say, I read Laz's old article in Ultra Running about bigs. It was very fascinating, psychological experiment, and I was, glued to the screen watching Harvey compete against Guillaume and Courtney, competing against Johan. But Laz is going to hate me, and maybe you're going to hate me, but I think it's gotten a little bit too big for itself. Laz
might even say that himself. Absolutely.
Well, maybe, but Laz sees it as like there's fixed time and there's fixed distance and there's backyard, and it's a third discipline. And I guess that's sort of true, but I liked it more when it was a quirky, one-off Laz thing. It disturbs me a little bit to see it everywhere for one reason, because I think, honestly, sleep deprivation, people talk about the damage that ultra runners do to themselves. Well, even marathon runners do to themselves, but ultra runners, people who run for hundreds of miles in multiple days, are doing all this damage to their bodies, and that can't be good for you. And I think on the whole, it is good for you. Maybe I'm wrong, but my sense is that it's a net positive balance, except sleep deprivation really leads to cumulative brain damage. There's a lot of scientific evidence that that's the case, that if you don't sleep now, you're going to have Alzheimer's, when you're 70, right? There seems to be a very increased risk of that. And you don't see the damage because it's slow accumulation and it doesn't hit you till much later. And, in a 6-day race, you can sleep 4 or 5 hours a night and still run an awesome race. In a backyard, what is the effect of, at most, 10, well, typically none, and maybe 15 minutes of sleep for multiple days in a row? It's not something I honestly think is good for people. Maybe I'm wrong. And so it's not a format that really appeals to me from that perspective. And it's also not a format that I think I'm really strong at because I don't have good sleep deprivation skills. It is something that psychologically, as I went through it last year, was very interesting. The mental ups and downs about, the whole point that Laz came up with it with in the first place. You don't know how long the race is going to last. And, normally, at least at bigs, you're running with a lot of other people and you can look at them and think, you can see people dropping off and gauge some sense of your odds of actually winning the race. It's harder when it's virtual and you're running your own course by yourself. But nonetheless, I thought I was going to sidestep that by giving myself a goal of 48 hours. Nonetheless, I got sucked into looking at the attrition rate, right? And thinking about, my wife was crewing me and I was telling her at the end of the first night, I don't think I'm going to make it past 24 hours, which is insane. Running 100 miles in 24 hours is nothing, if you're used to doing 150. But that format, and when I run a 24-hour race, I don't sleep at all. But so what's the big deal, right? But,
absolutely.
And my course was not like bigs. My course is easier than bigs. So I set up in my garage. I had a cot where I could go and lie down and for 5-10 minutes. But the psychology is incredibly fascinating. And I think I'm going to have more fun watching it. Though last year was so interesting with the virtual format and seeing all the different, how the two things that amazed me were Mexico. My God, these the Tarahumara runners, they had, as far as I understand, the toughest course of anybody. Yeah. And they were, I think, the third country. Is that right?
Yeah, and they still had 3 runners in, while most other countries had 2.
Right. At that point, they looked like the favorites, and they had a much harder course than bigs. And the Belgians, as I understand it, had the easiest course, and so it's no surprise that they actually won.
And they had strong runners there too. So
yes. But I guess what I would say about pacing strategy is at bigs it seems very complicated, but for the Belgians on a flat course, Karel Sabi ran a very smart race. As I understand it, maybe I'm wrong, his strategy once he got into it was to run a lap in 40 minutes and sleep 15 minutes every single lap. And if you have a flat course and you're a decent runner, you can do that. I don't think anybody can do that at bigs after 72 hours.
No, I think that the pace ends up dropping. Just myself with my experience, I went in with a strategy of, the person who's going to win this race is the person who's going to have slept the most. And the further they go along, 40, 50, 60, 70 hours in, if you can end up getting an extra 3 or 4 minutes of sleep than anybody else. Because for me personally, at 6 days in a dome, anxiety doesn't let me sleep. Like when lie down, and I know Bob Hearn is on the course and he's mowing me down. I would not sleep. But yet, in a bigs format, in a backyard format, you get done a loop, and that hour is going to start for everybody at the same time. So you might as well lie down and just close your eyes. If you fall asleep, great. If you don't fall asleep, that's fine. So there's no anxiety. And I found that was a significant difference. So
Cool.
there's so much to play at there, isn't there, Bob?
Yeah, there is.
And I think that what's fascinating, the theme or the thread throughout this is the complexity back to of the system, and not fully understanding the things that are going on against us or for us, and trying to have a plan that can overcome that. Like, so there are those days where the systems worked well, but we didn't actually know why, and sometimes they don't. There's this old sort of trivia question, eating, drinking, sleeping, which one will kill you first if you don't do them? Right? And it's sleeping. You can make it 5 days and then you'll die. Like, that system is the number one overrule. Like, you can go 2 weeks without eating and you're going to be okay. Not feeling great, but and drinking similarly. And so there is something to the sleep system that we can't conquer. Like, we just, like everything else, we can sort of manipulate our way through it. But that one, which is probably why that sleeping every hour turns that thing off every time. Like, okay, that switch was turned off, so you can keep going. But if you don't ever turn that switch off, this system is going to come right back at you because it wants to do something. And it's a fascinating part of the exploration. And then it's that optimization within that knowledge that'll sort of get you there. But it is. I don't think anyone really fully understood as we started this ultra sport what we would find, like these kinds of insights. And so it makes it fun, why these new formats can come out, and why something's hard versus easy, and who can go do things. And imagine, the next group that comes behind us who knew more about this, and it's getting faster. And there's some of this, there's what we would have called long races are getting so fast that they're crazy, like 50 miler, 100K, and people are like running at them like nothing you've ever seen. So Bob, like, tell us two things, and then we'll get to wrap up with you. But one is, do you have a race plan for this year? What's 21 look for you?
I really don't. It comes down to, the biggest thing is, 24-hour Worlds is supposed to be in May in Romania. And I would imagine, it hasn't been announced yet, but my guess would be that's going to be either canceled or more likely pushed back. And if it's pushed back, that means theoretically I might have another chance to qualify, and that would take priority. And so I'm going to have, everything sort of depends on that. Other than that, I'm registered for Spartathlon, my favorite race, which I've missed for the last 2 years. I'm registered for Vol State again. I had a really good Vol State last year, not going in specifically trained for it, and that gives me some confidence that I could have a reasonable shot at the course record. But honestly, 6-day is more important to me. I was not able to run a 6-day last year. I want to run one this year, and so I don't think there's probably going to be a way to fit in what I want to do this year. What I'm afraid of is that 24-hour Worlds will get pushed back to the point where it conflicts with Spartathlon. And I'm still going to have to take my best shot at making the 24-hour team, because that's been my top running goal for the last 6 years. And I come up, 1 year I was literally 300 feet short of making the team. Another year I was 1 mile short. And, but, it also is going to kill me to miss Spartathlon again for 3 years in a row. That's hands down my favorite race. So I don't know. It's 24-hour Worlds, it's Spartathlon, and then 6-day or Vol State are my part. Oh, and also now that I turned 55, I can think about age group world records that were out of reach before I was 55. I was 1 mile short of the 12-hour age group world record at Desert Solstice, and I could have had it if I'd been pacing for it, but I was pacing for making the 24-hour team. So that's something to look at, is to run a fast 100 with a 12-hour age group world record, maybe I ran 1444 for 100 a year ago. The age group 100-mile world record on the books is actually 1514, I believe. But the books have not been updated because there's a Brit who ran 1424. So can I go from a 1444 to a 1424? I might consider trying that. I've never really trained hard specifically for 100. So those are all possibilities.
Yeah, you're going to have to go and do some more speed work.
Yes.
Start spending some time with Dave Proctor, and you can do that anytime you want.
Yeah.
So like
I remember at the Dome, Dave, we were talking late in the Dome. You were keeping me company, and you were saying something about training, about, some days you just got to go out and, do those long runs, at 17-minute 5K pace, because you got to do it. And I'm like, Dave, I've never run a 17-minute 5K in my life. We're in a different world here.
Let's start that today. Yeah. So our closing question always more broader than just this year's plan is, what's your, like, you've been on this data path, you've been on this ultra path, if you were to tell our listeners what's, Bob Hearn's chasing tomorrow, your big thinking for what comes next.
Honestly, something we haven't touched on is there's kind of a spiritual side of running that has really only been more obvious to me as I started doing multi-days. I've been doing meditation lately, reading about Buddhism, and I've had these experiences during or after multi-days that I would almost call enlightenment experiences. And that in and of itself is, enough to run the race, let alone records or goals or winning or losing or anything. Just the sheer experience that results from, continuous effort over multiple days, and the sleep deprivation and the camaraderie and all that goes into it just strips away so much from your mind that you're in this incredibly open, clear space. And so that's really, I think what is driving me going forwards. I'd like to be able to still running age group records when I'm 80, like Don Winkley, because I'm not, I started running at 38, I'm 55. So far, I've managed to run, not just age graded, but actual PRs every year since then. Obviously, that's not going to continue for much longer, and there's going to be a motivational and emotional shift at that point. But if I can focus at that point on the more spiritual side and rewards and community rewards, which are related, maybe that'll keep me going.
Wow, Bob, that's beautiful. With the Chasing Tomorrow podcast, that's one of the things that Joe and I always say is that we're always trying to uncover the science and the spirit of why, extraordinary people are doing extraordinary things. And I think that you've topped out on the science. And I think that you're just starting to uncover the spirit of all these things. So, that's a beautiful way to end this conversation, Bob. This has been an incredible hour. I've gained so much from this. I'm gonna end taking this conversation offline because I think I could learn so much from a runner like yourself. And I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for spending this hour with us.
Yeah,
thank you so much, Dave, Joe. It's been a real pleasure, and thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah, wish you the best this year, and let's stay in touch and revisit this at the end of the year and see how some of these tactics and techniques and spirit made a difference for you.
Okay, will do.
Take care.
Thanks, Bob.
Guys.